Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Terry Goodtrack. I'm the President and CEO of AFOA Canada. I'd like to welcome you to AFOA Canada's 8th and final live webinar in this series, The Evolving Indigenous Workplace, Defining a New Normal, where we are sharing resources and information that help you navigate through the ever-changing events around COVID-19. If you have any questions during the presentation, please add them to the Q&A window. There will also be a 15 to 20 minute Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Today, we have our presentation is on auditing in the age of COVID-19. How are auditors and organizations adjusting to auditing with the challenges of COVID? This session will outline the challenges and opportunities of completing audits with the impacts of social distancing and limited access to physical locations. We will discuss the use of digital platforms for the completion of the audit, as well as outline the more challenging audit areas and alternatives for addressing these. Our presenters, we have 4 presenters today. We have Blair Smith, Brian Callender, David Pluta, and Matthew Perron, all from BDO. Blair Smith, he has over 20 years of auditing experience and is a managing partner of BDO's office in Thunder Bay. Blair's industry specialties include First Nations, educational institutions, nonprofit organizations, municipalities, and forestry. He has also worked on a variety of consulting engagements, including operational reviews and strategic planning. Brian Callender is a partner in BDO's Kamloops office and has extensive consulting and advisory experience, including forensic accounting, project management, and policy development. His area specialty is in First Nations accounting and auditing and in government funding, developed through his years of public accounting and as a director of finance for a large First Nation in northwestern British Columbia. David Pluta is a partner in BDO's Montreal office with over 14 years of professional experience providing assurance and accounting services to small and medium-sized enterprises. He has provided accounting and insurance services to clients in a wide range of industries, including First Nations communities, technology, construction, transportation, manufacturing, and not-for-profit organizations. Finally, Matthew Perron is a partner in BDO's Calgary office and provides exemplary service and support to a variety of clients. His client base includes services to landlords, developers, home builders, and a variety of construction companies. He has helped his clients with tax planning, tax restructuring, accounting, and advice on the application of GAAP. Welcome to our 8th live webinar, everyone. I'd like to turn it over to Brian Smith. Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Terry. Good afternoon or good morning, I guess, depending upon where you are today. Very pleased to have this opportunity to present to you today, and we have a number of partners from across the country who work in our First Nations area, and what impact COVID is having in terms of audits. And I think a lot of what you're going to hear is, audit per se doesn't really change in terms of what we're trying to achieve, but there are some definite challenges that we're facing and that various organizations are facing as we try to address the audit requirements and getting the information and completing the testing and so on. So we're, as Terry pointed out, there's 4 presenters today. I'm going to open and close, and Matt, David, and Brian are going to go through some of the details. In terms of the agenda, some of this is going to be highlighting, just in terms of how audits haven't changed in some ways. And then towards the end, we'll get into some of the more specifics around what we're seeing and what we've learned and what we're hearing in terms of audit and dealing with remote completion of audits and so on. So the agenda there, you can see we're going to talk about audit preparation, management's role in that preparation. What is the auditor's role? What are we trying to achieve and how are we trying to get there? Then we're going to talk a little more specifically on some of the impacts of COVID and what we're finding is working or not working as we work through it. I think we've completed quite a number of audits, whether they be municipalities or private corporations that had, December through March year end. So we're certainly seeing a lot of experience in trying to learn as we go and pass along best practices. A few other issues that we just want to highlight for people, make sure that everybody's aware. And then as Terry mentioned, at the end, we'll have 15 minutes or so for Q&A, and certainly happy to answer any questions that people may have. So just maybe before I turn it over to Matt, who's going to talk about the audit preparation, we do have 4 polling questions that we wanted to put up, just so that we can get a feel for where everybody's at. So maybe we'll just take a minute or two here, and if people could complete the polling questions, and then we'll turn it over to Matt. Okay, well, hopefully everybody had a chance to do that. So with that, I'll turn over to Matthew Perron in Calgary, and he'll lead us through the next section.
Thanks, Blair. This next slide, the slide's on right now, introduces us to some familiar concepts that we think would be important regardless of COVID's 19 impacts. It's probably something that you have seen many times or you've heard your auditors speak to in various prep presentations. At this stage, my clients are pretty numb from hearing me speak to these types of audit prep work and the importance of it. But regardless, there's a number of good reasons to prepare for your audit. And given that you or your staff may have been forced to work, out of office or in social distancing settings, these types of preparation become even more critical. One of the challenges I often see is that for accountants or program managers in the organization, they don't always get all of the information that they need. Sometimes they see money come in, or they get a check requisition to pay something, but it's often unclear to the full nature of those payments and receipts. So part of your audit preparation should involve being fully aware of the operations that took place during the year. To do this, it's important to have the necessary conversations with others in the organization so that it reduces the time to complete the audit and reduces the disruptions once the audit starts. And those conversations are taking place differently in COVID-19 times, where you might have went to someone's office or walked down the hall. You might be forced to pick up the phone, to FaceTime, to video chat, to send a text or an email. And it's important that you get complete information when you're doing that. This type of audit preparedness will help in the long run of getting the audit done as efficiently as possible. One of the things we've seen so far in what we call after COVID times is that everything just seems to be taking a little bit longer to get done. Next slide, Blair. So this slide has a little bit more detail on what your role or management's role is in preparing for the audit while dealing with COVID-related implications. Remember that financial statements are your story of what happened during the year. So this is your opportunity to tell that story. COVID has only had an impact for, about 15 days of that story, assuming you're a March 31st filer. Certainly it's having a dramatic impact post your year end, but that doesn't change the story of what took place during the year. COVID does add another layer of challenge, especially if you're not in the office with your colleagues, or it may have impacted various departments if operations were forced to shut down for, say, the last 15 days of the year. it will definitely take a more coordinated effort on your part and on management's part to ensure that your records are complete. I've been telling my clients to call or email vendors, double check with funding agencies, just to find out that what's been received or what's been paid or what's payable is complete and up to year end, as an example. Additionally, it's a good idea to check with others in the organization to ensure revenues or expenditures are recorded in the right programs or profit centers. It's oftentimes we see that it's difficult to track even when you're in office and able to just walk down the hall. It's something I always remind my clients about. It's really important because we want to try and minimize any surplus repayments wherever possible. Remember to reconcile all your accounts, not just the easy ones. If you're unsure on something, ask. Not knowing or not having an answer is a guaranteed sign that your auditors are going to ask about it. And trust me, the auditors always ask about those unreconciled accounts. I'm now going to pass it along to David, who will talk a little bit further about the roles in the audit preparation process.
Thanks, Matt. So our role as auditors hasn't really changed, right? Blair mentioned that at the beginning. The accounting, the audit rules haven't changed. There hasn't been a new handbook section. It's just everything is just harder to do the audit. So we still have to plan to make sure we test all the financial statement areas. We still have to make sure all the financial statement disclosures are there and they meet the accounting standards. So just on this point for the audit report, what we're expecting this year is to see a lot more audit reports with qualified opinion. So just as an example, one of my clients, because of all the travel restrictions that we're having at the end of March and even till this day, we weren't able to attend the physical inventory and do our test counts, right? It's impossible to do rollbacks in that client. We couldn't do virtual inventory counts. So we will have to issue a qualified opinion for inventory. And there are other cases like that too. Ensure the needs of the financial statement users are met through the disclosure and details of the financial statements. So just to go back to my inventory example, it's just important to let the users know of any issues that you have. So in this case, with my client, we let the bank know right away that we'll have a qualification on inventory in their statements. And everybody understands, everybody knows the situation with COVID. They completely understood and they said, okay, fine. Also, it's very important to let your users know if you're gonna be missing any deadlines. I think Brian's gonna talk about some of the deadlines, but also your banks have certain deadlines for their financial statements. If you're gonna be late, make them, let them know as soon as possible. Identify and assess the risk of material misstatements. So as auditors, we do that and we obtain audit evidence. Brian's going to talk a little bit more about that and the challenges with obtaining this audit evidence in the COVID age. Next slide. We work with management to plan the timing and extent of our audit. So I hope all of you by now have established a plan with your auditors regarding this year's audit. I think I saw the polling questions. There is about, I think 78% of you already said that you plan on doing all your audits remotely. So me too. So in Quebec, our situation was a bit, okay, there you go. So it's actually 79% of you. So yeah, so in Quebec, because of our COVID situation was getting a bit out of hand, in April, I spoke to all my clients and we all agreed that we would do all the audits remotely, and so far it's been working pretty well. Concludes on the appropriateness of management's use of going concern. So you're seeing a lot of companies going bankrupt, facing financial difficulties. It's highly unlikely that a First Nation band will ever go bankrupt. But just expect to get more questions from your auditors, especially on some of your GBEs, your government business enterprises. If they forced to shut down, if one of their main clients has gone bankrupt. So there could be issues there that we're gonna look at more carefully. And then finally, we do a report to the Chief and Counsel on the financial statements. and we provide a management letter to Chief and Counsel. So that's about it. I'm going to pass it over to Brian, who's going to just talk more about how COVID is impacting our audit procedures more in detail.
Sure. Thanks, David. I think, you know, and we've covered it off. We're not really changing auditing. And that's probably the biggest thing, whether it's how we prepare, how you prepare. Nothing really has changed that way. And David's talked about a couple of areas where we have some concerns or we have some difficulties in obtaining sufficient audit evidence. I'll talk about those a little bit more. But really, I think that's the biggest thing that we want to get across, is that nothing is really changing. We put government travel restrictions in place, and even beyond the government travel restrictions, you know, there are communities that are still saying, no, we don't want tourists there. We don't want our auditors to visit, etc. And you know, I think everybody is trying to limit their circle or their bubble of exposure to people they know, friends and family, etc. We completely understand that. And I think all of your auditors typically that work in this industry are also very respectful of the idea that there is nothing more cherished in our clients than the elders. And unfortunately, with the current situation, the elders are what we're seeing are the most at risk. So BDO or your audit firm in general is not wanting to do anything with that. So we're working very, very diligently in order to make sure that we limit our exposures and we try to complete as much work as possible remotely. Next slide, Blair. So in terms of what we're finding, and Matt's kind of alluded to it a little bit on timeliness, on things like that, what we're talking about here is communication, and communication is key. As a partner responsible for, you know, probably about 15 or 20 audits at this time of the year, the one thing that we're really, really finding is internally, we're doing a lot more communication, a lot more of these Zooms or Skypes or Teams presentations, discussions, where we at. The check-ins are more and more required. The biggest thing that we're finding with our clients and the ones that we're auditing right now is the need for essentially, for lack of a better word, a quarterback. And we're assuming that would be your financial officers or controllers. You know, that timeliness of having a remote team, we need to have a central sort of repository where everything is going to go in terms of the information. And that information is really, really important on how we communicate it. So what we're doing in our clients and seem to have the best success is we're using our financial officers as the key. We're creating our checklists on what we need. They're then disseminating those checklists out to their AR clerks, payroll clerks, etc., in order to allow us a better chance of getting the information timely. And also it allows them to check up to make sure that their own team members are fulfilling their roles. The transfer of information is something I think we all need to be aware of. You know, emails are being hacked, and I'll talk about frauds later, but we're already seeing frauds being perpetrated as a result of COVID. But, you know, what we're doing and what you need to do is look at different ways to have access to the information, different ways in order to transfer it, whether it's Dropboxes, portals, or other web-based systems that don't involve emails or easily accessed areas. I think that's a key part. The other thing that, you know, we're going to be really, really pushing on you, and to some extent too, is those ideas of third-party confirmations. Remember, it's not just your auditor in your office that's affected. Your law firms are down to skeleton crews. The banks are down to skeleton crews, etc. So everything is being delayed, as Matthew indicated. And then I think what I would do is once your audit starts, look at the idea of having you know, check-ins, whether it's weekly, bi-weekly, whatever, and start to schedule those. I'm making sure that my audit teams are touching base frequently and regularly with my clients in order to say, here's the 10 things that we've received, but we're missing these 5 in order to keep those audits moving. And don't take that as a criticism, take that as just simply a reminder that, you know, we are working towards sort of the same goals to get this done. Next slide, please. What we've talked about is sort of those restrictive areas and where we're beginning to hit issues that we can't necessarily audit around. And David referred to number one, which is the inventory. Inventory is an area that, depending on its materiality, will definitely result in a scope limitation. You know, things like gas stations, etc. Those are easy for us to roll back in some situations, which basically means tell us when it was refilled, give us the day sales in between. We could recalculate what your inventory was. Other areas do not work so quickly and easy, so that is an area, as David said, a scope limitation may be required on the audit. And realize that that scope limitation is not something that necessarily means is this year one and done. Some of those scope things will carry over into your 2021 as well, because this year's closing balance is next year's opening balance. So any error in that is going to carry forward. David also talked about government businesses, and I think that that is a key area. We're seeing business failures in the news. We're seeing you know, large corporations entering into bankruptcy protection, etc. That's something that, you know, our own businesses will not be immune from. And we need to be aware of what impact that would have. Now, the assessment of something as a government business entity versus you know, an other organization is the difference between a minor note disclosure and or a full consolidation of the balances. So we got to do that. In other instances, we're finding the same thing. We cannot get statements on all of those entities. They're being delayed, they're being slowed. So we will find that we have scope limitations as well on some of those entities. Short-term investments, unfortunately, if you are packing large portfolios, be ready for a hit as we adjust those values down given the stock market volatility. The biggest one that I think that we're really potentially overlooking, and to circle back on the idea that it's not just you and us that is impacted, is other people. Who are your customers? Who are we doing business with? Who owes us money that might be experiencing difficulty? In BC, our forest industry has been struggling for a while. Is COVID the final nail on some of those contractors and stuff that might be in trouble? So be reviewing those accounts receivable. And the one that I put on there is the one that's in the news, Dominion Diamond, right? I mean, large profitable business, but now all of a sudden they're in doubt. And that would affect all of the communities doing business with that organization. And maybe those amounts should be allowed for as uncollectible. The last one I touch on is test the controls. I'll talk about that later. Test the controls is something that's very, very hard to do in a digital world because it involves sort of walking transactions through live stream and historical, making sure that all of the signatures and that are in place. In the instance where your auditor necessarily couldn't complete a test of controls this year, it may be that he's going to ask you for a lot more significant testing of expenses or payroll and things like that, which are typical streams where controls come into. And then lastly is subsequent events. Guaranteed, every set of financial statements you have is going to have subsequent event disclosure surrounding COVID on the uncertainty on what this means to the community, to the government. But the other one there is, and as Matt alluded to it, every business is being delayed. We need to make sure that we have all of the purchases, all of the expenses that should be are appropriately cut off, because your suppliers might be delayed. They might be shut down and they're not mailing you invoices and that in order to get their money paid. Next slide, please. And the last one is basically on approval of your financial statements. Virtual meetings are key, and there is no requirement that your auditor be present or that a face-to-face meeting occur. What we have to do is make sure that all of the equipment is there, that we're prepared on what it's going to mean, digital signing, things like DocuSign and stuff like that, different softwares that we can use. What we have to do again is, can we disseminate the information through to our chief and councils securely, confidentially, in order for those communities or those presentations to occur. And I think that is a key area. Next slide. A little bit more just on the controls, and I think that this one is here. And this speaks more to the fraud. What we've seen in communities is really strategic ways to exploit the lack of controls in several settings. We've seen significant money being misappropriated from First Nations governments already. I think the bigger issue that I want to talk about on this as well is the idea that if you have a solid control base, be looking at it now in terms of what you're doing, what you have to do to supplement it for this new reality. How can we deal with it? And there's, you know, the biggest thing that I have in here is use your digital tools. We have significant softwares that make virtual auditing very simple, whether it is NetSuite, Microsoft Dynamics, Adagio, which has a document storage feature to it, or Zintax, etc. All of these softwares allow your auditors to essentially enter your GL, attach scanned documents to each line of code, and review your operations remotely. Similarly, controls, documented approvals, digital sign-offs, and that can occur in that environment so that we all don't have to be passing stacks of accounts payable or checks for signing, etc., to be in place. So redesign your controls and make sure that they're effective. It's not only for the benefit of preventing fraud, but this is also going to allow you to have a test of controls that your auditor would rely on in fiscal 2021 as well. This period that we're looking at right now, in the immediate term, we're probably here for a couple more months. And if there is this second wave, we might operate this way for the next year. Redesign your processes and get yourself ready for this maybe to be a longer tool. And it might be that even your own staff prefer this method of operations. And we've had it in BDO where we've done polls. A lot of our staff aren't willing to, or aren't wanting to come back to the office and sit in their cubicle for this 8 to 5 anymore. What they're more interested in is coming in when needed for meetings, etc., but that they will work from home remotely and balance their own life a little bit better. That means that we're changing our internal controls, our processes to fit that. I think, you know, it behooves every organization to probably think that way as well. Start to look at what your staff want to do and how we're going to do this. Next slide. Deadlines. What I've put up here is essentially Indigenous Services in the Pacific region has notified all of the First Nations that, well, under the Financial Transparency Act, they cannot extend the deadline without a legislative change, that there will be no impact for 90 days, which is meaning that for the next 90 days, they will not be withholding funding. They will not be actioning anything on the delivery of your audit. Now, that essentially extends us out to October 27th, but banking day for ISK is usually about the second Monday of the following month. That may extend us up to November 15th to deliver these audits without impact that we know of so far. And again, that is based on what the Pacific region has said, but I am not certain on each region across the country. So I think we need to, you know, that's one area we need to look at, but look at your other agreements, look at other agencies that are providing you funding. So far, I've heard nothing further from CMHC regarding any extensions. In a BC, we have an agreement that really had a June 30th deadline. Every First Nation in the province is receiving this funding in 2020. They've now essentially went, okay, we'll give you an extension until July 31st. So, you know, we're hitting multiple deadlines on your audits as well, and we got to make sure that we meet those, or there could be funding implications and ramifications down the road. So it's something we definitely need to be looking into for each organization across the board. Next slide. I'm down to Blair at this point. One other thing that I just sort of wanted to touch on quickly is let's get started. I saw on the polling questions, there's a lot of unsures. There's a lot of, I think we need to start now. We need to move forward on it and have those discussions with your auditor right away. Thanks, Blair. It's back to you.
Just saying that, a lot of clients, they've thought about the impacts for this year in terms of their audits, but haven't really thought too far ahead in terms of, well, what does all this mean for my audit for next year, and how am I going to deal with that? Because while we got to get this year's audit done, obviously it would be a lot easier to deal with the issues of the changes in your systems of internal controls and some of the challenges that you're facing. So we're planning for that in advance. So, quite a diverse number of issues and challenges that come up in the process of all this. So I think at this point we do have another 4 polling questions that maybe we'll put up and take a couple minutes for people to answer, and then I'll sort of summarize things. Then we can open up for question and answer. So. Okay. So, so maybe just we'll just take a second here and take a look at the polling questions. So, interesting. The first one there talked about, have you had to change your internal control systems? And more than half have, which is probably not super surprising. I think it's important that people are aware and planning around that, so that's good. Wage subsidy program. Obviously, there's quite a number of different programs that the government has introduced, and there certainly are some programs that some of your GBEs and so on may qualify for. So, if you haven't looked at that at all, that is certainly something that you might want to take a bit of time and research or get some information on. Yeah, just in terms of, are you planning on having the auditors come out? This is a big question that we get internally is, how are we going to do this and what is the expectation? So, yeah, it kind of looks like probably the majority haven't really decided what's going to happen that way, and totally fair. I think, to a large extent, a lot of us are sort of waiting to see what is going to happen and what are we able to do and what are we not able to do from that way. And then the last question, just in terms of having staff back in the office, yeah, like not quite half, but hoping to get people back into the office before the end of the year. And I think Brian was talking a little bit about some of the challenges of that, and maybe our people's attitudes have changed about being in the office all the time. And we'll have to learn and adjust as we go. So thank you very much for those answers. So I think maybe before we get into question and answer and whatnot at this point, I just to summarize from our perspective what we were trying to emphasize on. I think, the big thing is audit doesn't really change in terms of what we're trying to prove. We have the same assertions and the same basic things that we're trying to get sufficient audit evidence on. I think what is changing is how do we gather that information? What sort of testing do we do, and what are some of the risk areas in terms of looking at those? And clearly one of the big challenges is dealing with the whole, how do we know if we've got all the payables? And not a First Nation client, but an organization that I actually the treasurer for. We had a large event in early February, and still struggling to get some of the invoices out of some of the suppliers, because some of these businesses have just closed down due to COVID, and they're struggling to get their bills out and so on. So making sure that we're trying to identify what we're missing and trying to chase that along. The process will be far more digital. Certainly different auditors will have different platforms that they use. We generally will use what we call the client portal, where documents can be uploaded and transferred back and forth and so on. Lots of it can be done by email and different things, but as opposed to the auditor sitting in a room with a box of invoices going through it, there's a lot more now where the clients are uploading the documents, we check them, and go on from there. So, but then I think the one critical success factor to getting these audits done, and I think all three of the presenters kind of touched on it, is just the need for constant communication. Everybody needs to know where everybody's at, who's working on what we think the deadlines are. That's always a challenge in any audit, I find, but when we're not all together and in the same room or same building, that becomes even a bigger issue. So one of the things I highly recommend is set up a regular schedule for communicating and following up on what each side thinks is outstanding from the other, so that that'll close the expectation gap and identify where things will fall through the cracks. Certainly nobody wants that to happen, but undoubtedly that is going to be a challenge. So those are some of the big things that we're seeing and things that we learned, I guess a lot of it through our municipal auditing. That was really the first big step in how we attack these audits from a virtual perspective. So I think beyond the audit issues and so on, obviously the day-to-day management continues to be a challenge. I think you're going to deal with different challenges, different people, maybe different suppliers. Maybe some of your suppliers have had to change because people have closed down or gone out of business. Those are ongoing factors that I'm sure everybody's dealing with. Just in terms of government assistance and whatnot, just a couple of areas. If you did want to go gather up some more information on our website, there is we did a presentation about a month or so ago on government assistance and the government programs and so on, and what qualified. And as well, on the BDO site, there is you can go to the COVID section, and in there there's a complete listing of all the government programs, wage subsidies, loan programs, all that good stuff that you might want to take a look at and see if you might qualify for, because if you can access some of that and you're dealing with slowdowns in your businesses and so on, that could help to bridge the gap in terms of keeping your people and keeping your businesses moving forward. So just a couple things for people to think about. And if you're looking for more information, there are certainly a multitude of sites out there that are tracking all that good stuff. So I guess maybe with that, I will stop and we can open it up and see if there are any questions.
You put it in the Q&A box and we can certainly access the question. You know, when I was listening to your presentation, you guys, I guess the one statement that obviously stuck out to me was this, you know, the potential for qualified opinions due to inventory, right? And I did like your you know, suggestion. You know, obviously if it's immaterial, you know, it won't affect, but certainly if it gets you know, it's other inventory that can't be verified, that there's a potential to be for a qualified opinion. What is it? You know, is there something you know, I guess communities can do to help give you guys better assurance in that area, so that we, you know, so they don't have to actually get a qualified opinion? Like, do you have some suggestions of what they can do that could, you know, kind of push it over that threshold where we'll be unqualified or a clean audit opinion?
Yeah, I think it, you know, really depends quite a bit on what kind of inventory we're talking about. You know, there are different types of inventory. I think Brian had referenced, you know, a gas station as an example where, you know, maybe steps could be taken at, you know, after the year end to determine what the inventory on hand is and move it or what we call roll back, but sort of go backwards in the records to see what the balance would have been at year end. But there, you know, there are some where we just don't have the controls and the tracking system that would allow us to go backwards in time. You know, I think to a large extent, the other part to think about is, you know, talk with the users, the funders of the financial statements, because, you know, some of those processes can get time consuming and more costly, and it may make sense just to move forward with the qualification in one very small area. So, you know, I think every situation is a little bit different. I don't think there's one answer that fits all, but you know, I think one of the things to keep in mind is you also don't want to spend thousands and thousands of dollars if it's something that the financial statement users really aren't that worried about and are quite willing to accept without it. So
just to complete that, so just if we do a qualification on some of your GBEs, and some of it doesn't necessarily mean that your First Nation will have a qualification, because their materiality is usually much higher, right? So in my example that I had the client, it was a grocery store, and it's impossible to do any rollback procedures just because grocery stores, actually in this COVID age, is one entity that's business has been rolling. They're having record profits now, and they're replenishing their inventory so fast that we can't do the test to go back. But in this case, for the First Nation, that inventory is not material. So even though we'll have a qualification in the grocery store, we won't have it in the First Nations financial statements.
Yeah, I guess my concern over it is just that, you know, and I get the point about who the users are, but, you know, I find, you know, when these, when the federal government rolls up these numbers, right, and despite, even if we put in there, you know, a separate paragraph that says, well, because of COVID, you know, this so forth happened, and that's why it was a qualification. But when the federal government rolls it up, you know, there'll be this increase in the number of qualified opinions in communities, right? So then the media gets a hold of it, and then all of a sudden it becomes an issue, right? And on the management of financial management in communities, opposed to, hey, look, this really had to do with a very unique circumstance, right? And that's why I'm saying, like, you know, there's got to be ways that, you know, those ones that are close to the threshold, how do we get them over, right, over the threshold? Any thoughts?
Yeah. Well, again, I think, you know, if it's really close, then you know, there are steps that could be taken to try to look at it a little bit more closely. But I think you're going to see more qualifications in almost everything that is out there. It's not just First Nations or GBEs or anything like that. This has been a real challenge. The one thing I would say is, we certainly also did a number of inventory counts, if we're using inventory as an example, virtually. Steps were taken to actually complete the inventory count process, even though we weren't necessarily on site. So, I don't think the fallback position was just to qualify on inventory as an example. But it really comes down to having access and availability to the information to be able to get ourselves to a comfort level on what that number was.
Right. Okay. I think there's a question here that Brian Cotter put in the Q&A box, which do you think audit costs will go up with more remote processes?
Yeah, it's a tough question, because every situation is a little bit different. I think as Matt sort of said, and we alluded to that, there are delays typically and frequent contacts and back and forth, that's all time. But in a remote community, what we're finding as well is our travel costs were a significant cost to that audit. Well, we're not incurring those. Those are going down.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's savings and there's costs that definitely are going, hand in hand. In some ways, there's efficiency to be gained with this. Typically if we'd have sent a group of auditors out into a community for 5 days, 10 days, they would work long hours and we'd be under that time crunch, get everything done within that time frame. With this scenario, with this auditing approach, it's something that, okay, cash is ready, so let's upload the cash documents. So at this point, I'm not trying to keep people busy because they're in the field. I'm not trying to, when the information's there, we're going to pick it up, we're going to deal with it, and then we're going to put it down and I can move on to the next file. That almost creates some efficiencies for my staff. But the key part is making sure that we're receiving all of the information that we requested, completed, ready to go. Back to sort of Matt's preparation. Send us something fully prepared that we can pick up, put down, and finish. We're in way better shape. Send it in dribs and drabs where we're picking it up over time and looking and finding and sending back. Definitely that this is a slower process. And if our staff are more involved in that process of back and forth, that is increasing our costs. There's also legitimately risks that come with this. The idea of the going concern on business entities, the collectability of AR and things like that. Those are things that as auditors, we are much more aware of what we're seeing in the market today. So we're doing additional procedures in that area. Brian, and Terry, we're definitely making sure that things are what they should be and what they appear to be in our audit opinions. So to say, is it costing us more on a whole? Really hard to say, because I'm experiencing significant travel savings, travel time, etc., on some of my audits as well.
That's a good point. I mean, it's a good point. I think what I'm hearing from you guys is saying, like if there is increased costs, you should talk to your auditor and say, hey, look, if you're a remote community or one that's quite some distance, and potentially there's some savings in travel that you could discuss, not necessarily increasing the cost or whatever, but just having that discussion, I guess. There's another question here that came in and really relates to fraud, right? You guys talked about it a little bit, which is how do you think COVID contributed to more cases of fraud? And I think that was Brian Connor, but Claudine Watt also kind of refocused it and said that someone discussed controls to put in place with the increase in fraud via emails. Could someone expand on this issue? And I think what you guys were talking about was when you transfer the working paper files to your auditors, that by email, that's what fraudsters kind of get a hold of, and maybe Dropbox is a more a Dropbox might be a better option to protect the confidentiality. So I guess in this area, maybe the question would be, is there some areas that are more susceptible to fraud that that you guys have identified that you think we should really focus in on to make sure that it's tight from a control point of view?
Where I'm noticing it is in your purchases stream. It's the vendors, and it's strategic, right? It's different ways that people are finding to misrepresent who they are, and looking for the electronic fund transfers and looking for, and it's, you know, this isn't somebody calling the office and say, hey, it's such and such, I'm traveling in Vancouver and I need some money transferred to my account, which I think as a controller, I saw that probably 3-4 times a year, right? It would be a counselor, it would be the administrator, it would be someone who would try to perpetrate such a, or somebody would pretend to be someone else because they could find that there was a meeting in Vancouver of the Chiefs on a given day. This is a slower play. Because of the timeline of COVID, they're inserting themselves in as a vendor and misrepresenting who that is. And then being able to turn around and alter the accounts payable cycle, that all of a sudden those funds that they think they're paying the person A, who is a qualified vendor, those funds are being directed somewhere else. In that instance, I would guess that there was a fraud that was somebody had already hacked into their email system and had used that to determine who they were doing business with, and then leverage that knowledge into getting an EFT directed to them or to the fraudster as opposed to the legitimate vendor. It's not that complicated to create a digital letterhead that looks exactly like someone else. To pick up the phone knowing that very limited staff are in the office and to represent that you're there and to get angry, to feel pressure, I need this payment, and it's done. So, there's this opportunity for the fraud to be perpetrated over a much longer period. And they're aware that the right people aren't in the office to necessarily get that done. Because that account's payable, for someone to change that account, the policies might have been, well, they got to go to the supervisor, or they got to go to, I got to pick up the phone and verify it with the account. Well, the account of the office is closed. They're working remotely. I don't know who I should reach out to. Let's just get it processed. The frauds are becoming easier in my mind. And that's where I think we really got to focus on our controls. We really got to dial that back, especially in the purchases scheme. Because that's where, if we're not controlling a purchase order cycle and we're not authorizing the EFTs right, and we're allowing changes to our vendors, etc., we are opening ourselves up. And I mean, the different softwares, the CGLs, etc., those still exist. Pirateware is still there. Those we continue to see being done as well. COVID creates a digital world, and with the digital world comes a lot more risks. And I don't think most communities are necessarily develop their risk protections adequately. And I think it increases it, Terry, when we have people working from home, a lot more emails, a lot more correspondence. I think it's an area that, we need to pay some attention to, because like I said, we could be doing this for 2 more years, and we need to be there.
Yeah, good. Okay, well, I think we're now at the end of our time. I would like to thank our presenters, Blair Smith, Brian Callender, David Pluta, and Matthew Perron from BDO, and all our participants for registering for today's live webinar. I would also like to take this time to mention that at AFOA Canada here, we're launching our Certified Indigenous Human Resource Professional Program, the IHRP. And the first session will be held virtually July 17th to the 19th on Zoom. We're also continuing to do our capacity development workshops on Zoom using the Zoom meeting platform. And 2, I'd like to highlight today that we have on the go, which is certainly one is on contract management. that's a big issue in our communities in terms of the amount of contracts awarded, and certainly we have a workshop available for that for communities to do it, sort of the specifics of how to administer a contract, what are the terms and conditions that go into it. And we have a lawyer that specializes in it, Graham Reagan, who actually provides that workshop, and it's just an excellent workshop. The second one that we have, I'll just like to mention today, spotlight on, which is the not-for-profit board governance workshop. And that, of course, outlines sort of the roles, responsibilities of board governance, and how sort of the ad hoc committees work, and sort of the governance responsibilities of directors and so forth. So I'd just like to highlight those two workshops. All the recordings and slides will be available for this workshop on the webinar page at www.afoa.ca. If you're registered and attended 3 of our webinars in this series, you are entered to win a prize and will be contacted via email. Good luck, everyone. Please fill out the survey, which will appear after the webinar. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our viewers and our presenters who have participated over the past 8 weeks as we have delivered our weekly live webinar series, The Evolving Indigenous Workplace, Defining the New Normal. Please join us in early September 2020 for our next exciting webinar series. All the information will be posted on our website and included in the AFOA Canada weekly newsletter. Have a good summer, everyone, and stay safe, and we'll see you in the fall. Thank you very much for attending. Bye now.